My name is Lily Parker. I am 36 years old, and I have worked at Meridian Gridworks for a full 8 years. My first days here still feel fresh, but 8 years in the energy sector lasts longer than people think. I used to joke with my old team that time at Meridian should be measured in dog years. 1 year counts as 7. Nothing about this industry is gentle. It runs 24 hours a day and does not allow mistakes. I came to Austin at 28, right after finishing a federal certification program for smart grid operations. Back then, Meridian was an up and coming firm praised as the future of Southern energy infrastructure. They needed someone who truly understood licensing, operations, risk, and the kind of compliance requirements only seasoned people ever fully grasp. I was not at the top of my class, but I was the only one who actually wanted the kind of work everyone else hated: licenses, procedures, and anything involving legal responsibility. My day revolved around the operations console we called our artificial sun. From there, I monitored the grid status across 3 states, reviewed alerts, cross checked licensing deadlines, and made sure every operational parameter was valid. Every line of data on that screen could be the first clue to a much larger problem. I do not boast, but no one understands better than I do that most of Meridian's stability relies on the invisible things I keep in compliance. Every federal license the company holds, every operational identification, every digital signing authority, and most of the compliance records are tied directly to my name. They used to call me the key holder. Over time, that title slowly softened into something dismissive. Legacy, outdated role, old function. The new hires did not understand my work, and the ones who did assumed I would always be there to carry it. I do not blame anyone. Most people do not understand the things they cannot see. Inside Meridian's office, there is a subtle but undeniable divide between the ambitious young crowd and the long timers. The young ones love talking about automation, speed, and flexibility. The veterans, people like me, are the ones who fix whatever the automation breaks. Plenty of them look at my job and think it is slow or obsolete. Some want to move everything to new platforms because it is trendy, and I have heard them whisper that my department is just the dust left over from Meridian's early years. I never respond. I know exactly what I am holding. At the start of each month, the United States Department of Energy sends me an email confirming the status of our licenses and reminding me of the operational responsibilities attached to them. In that email, my name sits alone next to the words license holder. I read it the way people read the weather, calmly, but never carelessly. Not because I am afraid of losing my job, but because if anything ever goes wrong, the first name mentioned in an investigation is always the license holder. I work with the caution of someone safeguarding an entire system. Yet the company culture moved in the opposite direction: fast paced, constantly shifting, driven by people who love performing louder than they deliver. I was never built for that kind of race. I came here to do the real work, not to make noise about it. And here is the irony. Buried halfway down my employment contract, in a section almost nobody ever reads, is a single clause. If my employment is terminated involuntarily, every operational license Meridian sponsored for me is revoked within 48 hours. Not suspended, not reduced, revoked completely. Anyone replacing me must go through the full licensing process from scratch. That takes weeks, sometimes months, depending on the license. Sometimes I ask myself why the company ever allowed that clause. Then I remember it was added at the very beginning, back when Meridian was small and needed someone, anyone, to hold licenses so they could expand operations into a second state. Back then, depending on one person was not a weakness. It was simply the fastest way to survive. No one imagined that 8 years later, that same clause would become a ticking bomb. That afternoon, while I was reviewing the upcoming quarter's renewal list, a company-wide announcement appeared in my inbox. Major restructuring next month. I skimmed through it, said nothing, and felt a cold line run down my back. People say that when a company announces restructuring, the first thing you should check is your savings account. I did not panic, but I knew whatever was coming would not be gentle. I saved the email, shut off my screen, and reminded myself to prepare more carefully than usual. Most of my adult life has been tied to Meridian, but I have never been naive enough to believe any company lasts forever, especially when the key holder becomes nothing more than a shadow in the control room. I leaned back, watched the screen fade to black, and let out a long breath. Every story has a beginning, and I guess this is where mine starts to turn. But before we go on, I want to know where you are listening from. Leave a comment below. I am always curious to see how far my story travels. And if you enjoy hearing about people who were underestimated but quietly held an entire system in their hands, do not forget to subscribe. What happens next is far more interesting. Cole Harper arrived at Meridian on a morning when the Austin weather was so unusually perfect, it made you think everything in life was falling into place. He walked into the office like it was a red carpet, wearing a navy suit tailored to the inch, shoes polished bright as glass, and a leadership smile so precise it could be taught in a training course. I have met many types of people in this field, but none with confidence polished to this level. During his very first introduction, he stood in front of the entire company with a flawless slide deck, using words so smooth they practically slid across the room. Every sentence was trimmed and polished like an advertisement. He talked about vision, flexibility, and a future built on removing anything unnecessary. Not a single mention of real operations or technical risk during the 20-minute presentation. I looked at the glowing slides behind him, then at the young employees taking notes like they were swallowing wisdom. All I felt was amusement. Great speakers always have a special effect on people who have never stood in a control room at 2 in the morning when a red alert flashes. A few days later, I learned part of the reason Cole arrived at Meridian so quickly. The board demanded a 15% cost reduction within 90 days. Not optimization. Cutting. Sharp and simple. Cole came from an energy tech company in Denver where the restructuring project he led had failed spectacularly. Rumor said he had been pushed out quietly, but his records were polished, so his career would not suffer. People like him often need a fast victory to rebuild their name, and Meridian became the place he chose to prove himself. He started viewing my work through a completely different lens. To Cole, everything could be fed into a cost analysis tool. My operations and compliance department did not generate revenue. We did not directly sell anything. We did not have growth charts to brighten up a slide. To him, that made my department replaceable. He talked endlessly about automation, even mentioning a new compliance analysis software he claimed could replace 80% of manual work. I knew that was an empty promise. A power grid is not an e-commerce platform, and it is certainly not something you hand entirely to software without people who understand the system's nature. But I did not argue. I never argue with people who assume their intelligence naturally outweighs everyone else's expertise. Instead of working with me, Cole spent more time with Tyler Marsh, a 25-year-old, who had been at the company a little over 6 months. Tyler was enthusiastic, energetic, fast-talking, and loved the kind of inspirational leadership Cole performed. He admired Cole so much that every time Cole talked about an automated future, Tyler nodded like he was watching a motivational conference. One morning, I noticed Tyler's name added to the operations dashboard management group, a role that had always belonged to me. Tyler happily told me Cole wanted him to learn my work, to prepare for a technological transition phase. I glanced at the screen he was staring at, full of blinking data panels and operational codes where a single misread character could trigger trouble. After 10 minutes, Tyler was already frowning and asking me 3 rapid questions. I answered each one briefly, and when he walked away, the confusion in his eyes was unmistakable. I did not blame him. I was his age once. Confidence always runs far ahead of ability. A few days later, I received an email inviting me to a strategy meeting with department heads. But at the exact meeting time, my calendar entry vanished. No explanation. When I asked the chief executive assistant, she simply said the attendee list had been adjusted under Cole's new personnel model. I sat down, opened the pending license list, and reminded myself not to get distracted. But I already knew. This was no ordinary restructuring. That afternoon, Cole sent out a new internal assessment. He titled it the Legacy Roles List, as if the people on it were outdated displays. I read the list from top to bottom, and my name was the very first one. I was not surprised, but it still felt like someone struck the back of my neck. That evening, I opened my laptop at home and reviewed my system access. Half of it had already been transferred to the younger team. The rest was scheduled to move within 2 weeks. I sat there, my hand on the trackpad, but not moving. The changes were far too deliberate. I had worked long enough to know this was not an accidental adjustment. This was preparation for removal. The next morning, as I passed the pantry to make coffee, I heard Cole telling a group of young employees that some roles could be placed in a museum soon. His tone was light, almost playful, as if it were a harmless joke. They laughed with him, and I stood still for a moment. For the first time, a chill settled in, not because of what he said, but because of how confidently he said it. I picked up my coffee, turned away, and walked out. And I knew, with more clarity than ever, what was coming. I just did not know that Meridian's long downward slide would begin at that very moment. I do not remember the exact date, but I remember perfectly the moment I opened the email and knew with certainty that I was going to be removed. It was an ordinary morning. I was reviewing automated reports when an unusual email appeared in my inbox. It was not meant for me, but the system misrouted it into my personal folder. When I opened it, the first line hit me with the force of something written in bold. Lily Parker's role can be eliminated after the cost review. Short, cold, and impossible to misunderstand. I stared at the line for a few seconds, my mind blank. The email had been sent from Cole to our chief executive, Olivia, and some automated error must have delivered it to me. I did not shake. I did not panic. It simply felt like someone had handed me written confirmation of what I had already known for weeks. They were not just planning to remove me, they had decided. I closed the email, saved a legal copy into my personal archive, and sat quietly in front of the screen. I once thought that if the day came when they tried to fire me, I would feel hurt or angry. But all I felt was clarity. When you are faced with undeniable evidence, everything becomes simple. I stood up, made a cup of coffee, and began doing what I knew I needed to do. I opened the folders only I had access to and began backing up every file I had the legal right to retain. I did not take confidential documents, only the items tied to my name, my digital signature, and the federal records required by law to be mirrored by the responsible operator. I extracted 8 years of approval milestones, complete chains of electronic signatures, every phase-based license authorization, copies of contracts outlining my operational responsibilities, and my correspondence with the Department of Energy. Each time I saved a file, I renamed it using a structure only I understood. Not to hide anything, but to ensure that if the system were ever altered, the originals would survive in a place no one could accidentally erase. When I finished, I closed my laptop and left the office for a while. I drove to a small notary's office in an old building. The woman behind the counter was an older notary with silver hair and sharp eyes. She asked what I needed notarized. I handed her the stack, mostly confirmations of my operational authority and the sections of my contract tied to the license. She looked at me as she flipped through the papers. "So you are the license holder." I nodded. She pressed her seal onto the page and said softly, "Clauses like these are often ignored, but if anything happens, this is what protects you." I gave her a small smile. "I know, and I think the time is coming." She asked nothing more. Experienced notaries often understand more than what is spoken. When I returned to the office, I saw Tyler in the printing room. He was printing a stack of slides, moving so fast the pages nearly fell out of his hands. When he noticed me, he flinched and blurted out something he probably should not have said. "Cole just told our group that the entire system will be handed over to us. I thought you should know." There was no malice in his words. It was simply the truth spilling out of someone too young to guard it. Tyler did not know about the email I had read that morning, nor that I had expected this for a long time. He only felt overwhelmed by tasks he could not fully understand. I looked at him for 3 seconds, then said, "Thank you, Tyler." I returned to my desk. When I opened a familiar administration interface, the system displayed a message saying I no longer had administrative access. I checked another system. The same result. I sat upright as a cold line ran down my spine. It was the system I had built since 2016, every configuration line written by my own hand. No one in the company could operate it without understanding its foundation. And now they had stripped me of access. I did not get angry. I did not argue. I stood and walked to Cole's office. When he saw me, he gave me his smooth, polished smile. "What is going on, Lily?" I asked one question. "Did you remove my administrative access?" Cole leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "I am reallocating permissions for efficiency. Do not worry. Legal handles everything related to licenses. Nothing serious." I looked at him for a few seconds, then asked calmly, "Have you read all the clauses?" Cole laughed, a confident, careless half laugh. "Lily, I read everything. You worry too much." I knew he had no idea what I meant, and I knew he had never read a single federal clause about license holders. By the end of the day, a file began quietly spreading through internal Slack channels. A Phase 1 reduction list. No one knew where it originated, but everyone was talking about it. When I opened it, my eyes stopped immediately at the word redundant. My name sat right beneath it at the top of the list. I turned off my phone, stood up, and gathered my bag. The strangest feeling was not sadness, but total stillness. Once you see the path they have chosen, everything else becomes nothing more than the steps before the collapse they put in motion themselves. I locked my screen and walked out of the office, knowing a new chapter was about to open. Not for me, but for Meridian. I was the only one who saw it before it began. On the morning of the all-hands meeting, the air inside the building felt stretched tight like a stage before an important performance. Everyone knew this meeting was not meaningless, and more importantly, not harmless. I sat in the back row of the large auditorium, far enough from the lights to watch everyone without being seen. Cole Harper stepped onto the stage with the confidence of someone convinced he was the main character of every room. He began the familiar speech of people sent to cut costs, but who prefer to dress it up as innovation. Cole talked about a leaner future, about a sweeping transformation to push Meridian into the leading position of the industry. He talked about eliminating stagnation, optimizing resources, and shaping the next generation workforce. His glossy phrases floated above everyone like ribbons, but underneath them was a blade pointed straight at those listed as redundant. I watched faces nodding along, young employees taking notes so fast their pens could have snapped. They believed him. They had never lived through a real restructuring. When the meeting ended, I stood to return to my desk, but an HR staff member approached me with a thin, lifeless smile. "Lily, could you follow me to the next room? We need to discuss something." I did not ask anything. I simply walked after her into a small room near the west corridor. It used to be the room for interviewing candidates. Now it was time to end employment. Two HR representatives were already seated. On the table sat a neat stack of documents, the top page printed with the words, "Termination of Employment." I sat down and looked directly at them. The lead representative read a rehearsed paragraph in a flat voice, the tone of someone reading assembly instructions. "Lily Parker, after an organizational review, the company has determined that your current role falls under the redundant category. This decision is effective immediately. No further explanation. No one looked me in the eye." I took the folder and read every page. Nothing surprising. Everything matched the misdirected email from the day before. When I signed the final page, the pen moved lightly and decisively. I asked for a printed copy for my records. HR hesitated for a moment before agreeing. I placed the printed copy into my bag and stood up. The moment I signed, the clause in my contract activated. A clause I knew by heart, but they had not bothered to review. From the federal energy system, a chain of silent processes began. Every operational license tied to my name started shifting from active to pending revocation. No alert appeared yet on the company side, but the process was already running. A countdown had begun, invisible but real. I walked down the hall toward the main lobby. The glass doors opened, and a breeze brushed my hair as I stepped outside. I walked down the steps of the building feeling lighter than I expected. As I moved farther from the entrance, my phone buzzed lightly in my pocket. Not an urgent notice, just the usual automated report reminder. I turned it off and kept walking. Meanwhile, inside Meridian's control room, the icons on the dashboard began to shift colors. Blocks of data that had been bright green slowly turned warning yellow. A few smaller items switched to pending revoke. The system did not understand what was happening, but it registered the change. Tyler stared at the screen, sensing something was wrong on a scale he could not comprehend. He rushed to find Cole, who was preparing for his next meeting. Cole, the dashboard is not right. Some licenses are changing status. Cole did not even look at the screen. He waved his hand dismissively, as if shooing away a fly. We already transferred everything. It is probably updating old data. Relax. It is nothing. Tyler stood still, swallowing his unease. He was not confident enough to challenge Cole, but not foolish enough to ignore the expanding red edges on the dashboard. Cole, however, only cared about his next meeting, where he would talk once again about efficiency and productivity. That evening, when I returned to my small apartment, I made a cup of hot tea and sat by the window. I opened my personal laptop to check my email. As I expected, an email from the Federal Energy Compliance Board was already waiting. The first line read clearly, "Notification of license revocation process initiated." Below was the complete list of all operational licenses tied to my name, with projected revocation within 48 hours. I read it from start to finish and felt no negative emotion. I set the laptop aside, took a sip of tea, and leaned back. In 8 years of work, I had never created trouble for anyone, never done anything beyond my duty. I did not sabotage the company, I did not leave in anger, I did not seek revenge. I simply allowed the system to do exactly what they had signed. And if the result sent them into panic, that was not my fault. That was just the law, and their own choice. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of lightness. I had expected to feel empty after being fired, but instead, there was only quiet. I made a cup of coffee, opened the window to the morning sun, and had no idea that at that very moment, across West Texas and all the way out in New Mexico, Meridian's operational system had begun to sway like a ship with no rudder. The first incident occurred at 7:30 in the morning at the Santa Mesa wind facility in New Mexico. Right on schedule, a group of federal auditors arrived for a routine safety inspection. They presented their credentials at the gate, the Meridian guards scanned them, and everything looked normal until the system flashed a bright red alert. License holder inactive, access denied. The guard thought it was a network glitch. He tried again, then again. The same result. Eventually, he called the control room to report the issue. The auditors stood outside the gate with their arms folded, waiting. No one is allowed into an operational area if the responsible license holder is not valid. That is the law, and they follow it without exception. Meanwhile, at Meridian's Austin office, the central dashboard began shifting colors like a building smoldering from the inside. A few yellow warnings appeared, then red, then more red. In less than 2 minutes, over 1/3 of the dashboard had changed color, triggering a wave of high-priority alerts. Federal APIs returned error code 403 and invalid credentials. The morning shift staff crowded closer to the screen as if watching a live accident. Tyler stared at a line of text he had never seen before. Revocation process pending. License holder inactive. He swallowed hard, feeling the first true fear of a newcomer who suddenly realizes the job has outgrown their understanding. He ran to find Cole. In the emergency meeting convened at 8:17, Cole stood at the head of the table, visibly irritated. He did not understand why the system was reacting like this overnight. The compliance heads reported back-to-back 403 errors. Someone pointed at the screen. "We cannot send any data to the federal system. They are rejecting every connection from Meridian." Cole folded his arms, trying to steady the room with his usual confidence. "We just need to update the contact information. Switch the contact from Lily to Tyler or Chloe. Done." The room fell silent for several seconds before the compliance director spoke slowly. "That is impossible. A license is tied to a certified individual. It cannot be renamed. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be updated. The federal system does not operate like our internal one." Tyler sat at the end of the table, eyes on the papers in front of him. He said quietly, voice trembling, "I truly do not understand how this system works. I do not even know which version I am replacing." Cole snapped his head toward Tyler, a mix of irritation and confusion on his face. But Tyler's problem was nothing compared to what happened next. Chief Executive Olivia Carrington walked in. Olivia rarely appeared in unscheduled meetings. That alone revealed how severe the situation was. She scanned the room, her gaze passing over tense faces. When she reached Cole, she paused longer than usual. "Explain to me what is happening," Olivia said, her voice not loud but heavy enough to freeze the table. Cole started talking, trying to sound composed, but each sentence exposed how little he understood. Olivia listened, her expression losing patience piece by piece. At that same moment, Meridian's vendor, the energy storage supplier Steadwell, sent a warning email. Their delivery acknowledgement system could not confirm receipt due to missing compliance signatures. A micro-trial project in Nevada automatically shut down midway, causing thousands of dollars in losses and prompting the partner to demand an immediate explanation. A PR staffer rushed in and handed Olivia an iPad. On the screen was a freshly posted article from an energy news site. Meridian Gridworks faces compliance disruption. Multiple projects risk shutdown. Olivia read it, then lifted her head, her eyes sharp. She turned to Cole. "Can you confirm last week's restructuring did not affect the license holder or any federal responsibility chain?" Cole opened his mouth, but could not form a direct answer. Tyler stared at him, then looked down. The others needed only a few seconds to understand the full truth. The meeting fell into a heavy silence. Then, at that exact moment, a federal automated notice hit every inbox belonging to department heads and the control room. Estimated time until full license revocation: 17 hours, 43 minutes. Beneath the line was a countdown clock. The numbers blinked red like a widening wound. Olivia set the iPad on the table, her voice low but clear. "What have we done?" No one answered. The chaos had only just begun. The next morning, I was stretched out on my sofa, scrolling through the news for no reason at all, when my phone began vibrating nonstop. 3 missed calls, 2 voice messages, all from Meridian's HR department. Every message said the same thing in different words. "Lily, we need your support during this difficult period." Their voices sounded like people grabbing the sleeve of someone about to board a plane out of the country. I sat up, looked at the blinking notifications, and shook my head. Even at the edge of collapse, they still did not understand the truth. The only people responsible for this were themselves. I had done nothing. I had simply signed the contract they gave me 8 years ago. An hour later, an email from Chief Executive Olivia Carrington appeared in my inbox. Unlike HR, Olivia wrote clearly, directly, and with polished persuasion. "Lily, we request that you return to Meridian immediately as a special consultant for 6 months, with a salary increase of 15% and a project-based bonus. We hope you will cooperate to ensure that essential operations are not disrupted. Please consider this seriously." Attached below is a new contract. The salary was generous. The bonus is attractive. But the silence clause took nearly an entire page. I read each line carefully. Not allowed to mention the termination event. Not allowed to reference Meridian's violation of federal responsibility chains. Not allowed to discuss any operational issues before or after the termination date. Not allowed to speak about Cole Harper or the so-called Lean Project. In other words, they wanted me to come back, fix everything for them, and stay silent forever. I wondered what made them think I would agree. As I was thinking, another email arrived, and I almost laughed when I saw the sender. Cole Harper. "Lily," the email began with forced warmth. "I believe your lack of cooperation during transition has created some unintended system reactions. However, we are willing to put the past aside if you assist in restoring procedures during this time. The new team is not familiar with your platform. I hope you understand this is a collective company matter." His tone felt like a plea wrapped in arrogance, with a hint that the fault lay with me. The person locked out without warning, removed from meetings, then fired in a side room. Cole wanted to turn this into "Lily did not hand things over." The truth was that he never asked me for anything before stripping my access. I read the 3 HR emails, Olivia's email, and Cole's message, then shut the screen. I felt no anger, no explosive revenge like some people would expect, only clarity. I opened my laptop again and wrote an email addressed to Olivia and HR. I left Cole out. He was not worth another second of my time. I attached 3 documents: the contract clause they had signed 8 years ago, with the license revocation section highlighted. The email from the Federal Energy Compliance Board confirmed that the revocation process was underway. a screenshot of their own dashboard at the moment I lost access, proving handover was impossible because they had disabled me themselves. I wrote simply, I appreciate your offer, but I cannot return to a place that values removal over responsibility. What is happening is not my fault. It is the company's choice. I wish you the best in handling the current process. I clicked send. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I stood up, opened the window, and took a long breath. A chapter had closed. Meanwhile, at Meridian, Cole realized he could not fix the situation and was on the verge of becoming the scapegoat. He tried convincing a few employees, insisting that Lily had created obstacles and refused to transition anything. But the long-timers knew better than that. They knew exactly who carried the entire operational system in their head, who had warned them early, and who had been excluded from every meeting before being pushed out. Within hours, hallway conversations among the older employees had turned into a shared understanding. Cole is desperate. That afternoon, I received an email from Tyler Marsh. Short, shaky, filled with panic. Lily, I am sorry. I did not know it was this serious. I did not know what they were doing. I want you to know I never meant any harm. I hope you will be all right. I read it without blame. Tyler was just a young employee caught in a game far larger than he understood. By evening, as I was preparing dinner, another notification lit up my inbox. Invitation for an interview from Northbridge Renewables. I opened the message. The first line read, We have heard about your expertise and operational experience. We would like to meet you. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the screen glowing across the wall. And finally, I smiled. The door they closed was never the final one. It only opened a different path, brighter and far cleaner. I arrived at the headquarters of Northbridge Renewables on a cloudless morning. The Austin sky so clear I could see every sharp line of the distant buildings. Northbridge was not the largest company in the industry, but it was known for transparency and a culture that did not treat arrogance as a qualification. Their building was less glamorous than Meridian's, yet the atmosphere inside was completely different. Calm, focused, none of the feeling that everything was about to explode like those final days at Meridian. The interview room was on the 8th floor. No flashy slide decks, no performance-style speeches like Cole's, no questions about 10-year visions or implementing some trendy lean method. Instead, they placed a list of practical questions in front of me. How to handle federal incidents, how to maintain certification chains, how to train new personnel without creating dependency. Questions that let me talk about what actually matters. The operational nature of the system. No one mentioned Meridian. No one brought up drama. No one tried to dig for a scandal. They were there for expertise, not for noise. It felt better than any comforting words. At the end of the interview, Vivian, the operations director of Northbridge, leaned forward and asked a question I did not expect. If we rebuild the compliance department from the ground up, what would you want it to look like? I answered slowly, each word steady. I want a system with succession planning. No dependence on one single person. No one is carrying the entire license load the way I did. Knowledge should be shared. Documentation should be clear. Every process should have a backup. Vivian nodded. I completely agree. We do not want to repeat the mistakes of older companies. That answer told me they were truly listening, not just asking for the sake of formality. 2 days later, I received the official offer. Director of Grid Compliance and Operations Resilience. A role with real weight, not one dismissed as legacy or outdated. On my first day in the new office, I saw a large whiteboard filled with color-coded notes for quarterly projects. My team had 6 people, 3 under 30, full of energy, and 3 seasoned veterans from other companies. They did not look at me with doubt or condescension. They looked with respect and genuine curiosity. During our first meeting on responsibility distribution, I began with a simple statement. We will not repeat Meridian's model. Here, no one becomes the single key to the entire system. The room fell quiet, listening. I continued. A strong system is one where the creator can take a week off and everything still runs. If only one person understands a process, then that process is standing on the edge of risk. I saw the young team members' eyes brighten. They were not afraid of responsibility. They were afraid of cultures that never let them learn. The older staff nodded, as if finally hearing something worth hearing after years and sighed. Chaotic dependency. Training unfolded over several weeks. I broke the workflows into segments, assigned permissions by tiers. The young learned from the experienced. The experienced wrote documentation with me. Everything was digitized, layered, and backed up. I could feel the department shifting into place, not fast in a reckless way like Meridian once pretended to be, but steady, grounded. One afternoon, while I was explaining the new federal inspection notation, the office door clicked. When I looked up, Tyler Marsh was standing there. He wore a light blue shirt, looking both tense and relieved. "I have requested to transfer to Northbridge," Tyler said. "I do not want to stay somewhere that blames everything on you, and I do not want to work under someone who does not understand the system." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that once glowed with naive enthusiasm under Cole's influence. Now they were steadier, more grounded. "Tyler," I said, "you are not here to run away. You are here because you want to understand the real work. That matters." He bowed his head, grateful. The moment was quiet, not dramatic, but it reached me more deeply than I expected. Meridian had failed, but not every young employee was careless or shallow. Some simply needed the right environment to grow. As things settled, I spent one evening updating my LinkedIn profile. The line I wrote was short, not flashy, not loud. Grateful to join a team where compliance is a foundation, not an afterthought. No hashtag, no attention-seeking phrases, just one line. Anyone who understands the story will understand everything. A new door does not need a dramatic entrance. You just walk through it, knowing this time you are exactly where you belong. Meridian did not take long to fall into a spiral of federal penalties. When the federal countdown hit 0, every license tied to my name was officially revoked. The red warnings on their dashboard stopped blinking and turned solid. 3 wind farms, 1 lithium battery storage site, and 1 federal transmission line under Meridian were immediately classified as operating without authorization. 1 hour later, an email from the Energy Compliance Commission was sent directly to Meridian, listing projected penalties for each violation. Federal law allows no leniency. Operating without a supervising license holder, operating without a valid certified operator, or operating after a revoked license. Every violation is calculated by the hour. Within the first 24 hours, the projected fines exceeded everything Meridian had saved in an entire year of restructuring. 2 days later, the Energy Commission ordered a formal hearing in Washington. Meridian had no choice but to send Chief Executive Olivia Carrington and Cole Harper to explain the failure. Their presence was not to persuade, but to answer how a mid-sized company could make an error so basic it effectively severed its own operational lifeline. I received a request to attend as an operational expert on behalf of Northbridge because they wanted the person who understood the system best to clarify federal regulations. I agreed. This was not revenge. This was simply an opportunity to speak the truth while others tried to bend it. The hearing room sat inside a concrete federal building with high ceilings and harsh white lighting. The commission members sat in a long row, faces unreadable. Olivia looked calm on the surface, but her hands were clenched so tightly the knuckles had turned pale. Cole was different. He wore an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, but the confusion in his eyes was impossible to hide. The hearing began with a direct question, sharp as a blade. Why did Meridian terminate the sole license holder of its system without an approved replacement? The question dropped like a hammer. Olivia glanced at Cole as if expecting him to respond. Cole cleared his throat and offered a chain of vague explanations. During the transition, there were some glitches. The system did not update correctly. We believe we could change the contact information before recertification was required. A commissioner in the center cut him off. You believed you could simply change the contact information. Cole nodded. Yes, our internal procedure, federal procedure, does not work that way, another commissioner said. A license is tied to a certified individual. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be updated. It cannot be replaced. Cole tried to remain composed, but I could see his throat tighten. He was searching for words to climb out of a hole he had dug himself. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood and walked to the podium. None of this made me nervous. Northbridge had prepared every document. All I needed to do was state what I knew, and I knew every detail. I explained how federal operational licenses function, the responsibility chain each license holder carries, and why an energy system cannot function if the certified operator is removed without an approved succession plan. I did not speak about Meridian beyond the facts. I did not mention emotions, did not mention coal, did not mention why they fired me. I spoke only about the law. One commissioner turned toward Cole and asked a question that dropped the room into complete silence. Mr. Harper, did you read Ms. Parker's contract? Cole opened his mouth, but no sound came out for several seconds. He finally forced out, I reviewed part of it, but. No, but, the commissioner replied. The revocation clause is clearly written in Section 3. It is not hidden, not encoded, and cannot be misread. You terminated an active license holder without an approved replacement. Meridian triggered the revocation process on its own. I looked at Cole in that moment. There was no satisfaction in me, only the cold weight of truth, and the reality he could not escape. After the hearing, major newspapers began publishing analyses. Headlines like Case Study in Operational Mismanagement and a company that accidentally cut its own lifeline appeared across the industry. Experts shared the articles, calling Meridian a textbook example of what happens when operational staff are undervalued. Multiple Meridian projects were ordered to shut down completely until they secured a new certified license holder. But obtaining licenses is not fast. They spent 2 months just completing the initial application phase. In that time, 2 major partners canceled their contracts. The company's valuation dropped nearly 40% in the following quarter. An internal source sent me the post-hearing financial report. The last line read clearly, Meridian Gridworks is at risk of losing liquidity. I read it quietly. This was not my victory, it was the cost of arrogance, paid in full. A few months after the hearing in Washington, the name Meridian Gridworks disappeared from most energy bulletins, not because they recovered, but because they quietly shrank into the shadows. What had once been a regional point of pride had become a chain of extension requests, a list of assets pushed onto the market, and a restructuring file soaked in desperation. I heard Meridian sold 3 wind facilities to a European conglomerate. The lithium storage site was bought by a competitor for nearly 40% below its original valuation. The Austin office contracted down to 1 floor. Everything unfolded exactly according to the laws of a system stripped of its foundation. Remove the crucial brick, and the whole structure collapses without anyone pushing. Cole Harper left the company silently. No farewell email, no internal announcement, no send-off meeting. On a Tuesday morning, an internal message went out with 8 plain words. Cole Harper is no longer with Meridian. Curious, I checked his LinkedIn. His new job description read simply, Consultant, Strategic Advisor, Helping Companies Scale Smart. A line vague enough to mean anything. There were no comments, no notes of regret, no one is asking questions. Silence, as if Cole had never existed at Meridian at all. As for me, life at Northbridge Renewables moved with a kind of calm I had not felt in years. No sudden 9 p.m. meetings, no emails pushing someone to handle work outside their role, no hollow speeches about efficiency without understanding the system. At Northbridge, people really listened to one another. Every question sought an answer, not a scapegoat. One afternoon, while I was revising the training manual for the new team, a young employee named Harper, unrelated to Cole, paused at my doorway. She spoke with hesitation but sincerity. Lily, can I ask you something? I looked up. Of course. Do you regret anything? I mean about Meridian, about leaving, about everything that happened. I set my pen down and paused before answering, not because the question was hard, but because I wanted to speak the truth as I felt it. I do not regret leaving, I said. I only regret ever allowing them to underestimate me. She nodded, as if that answer touched something she had been thinking about herself. Then she smiled and walked down the hall. A month later, I attended the National Energy Conference in Houston. I represented Northbridge, presenting a model on distributed operational responsibility, the model we had been implementing with great success. After the session, I stepped out to get some water and unexpectedly saw Olivia Carrington standing a few feet away. She looked at me for a moment, weighing whether to approach. Finally, she walked over. "Lily," Olivia said, her voice lowered, "I want to apologize." I stayed silent, giving her room to continue. "I misjudged your role in the system, and I overestimated promises made by people who understood nothing about operations. Not every apology can fix its consequences, but I still want to say this. I am truly sorry." I looked at her without anger or bitterness. Some things arrive too late to hurt anymore. They simply settle like dust and disappear. "I hope Meridian learned what it needed to learn," I replied. "The rest is already behind us." Olivia nodded, her eyes slightly red, then walked away. That was the last time I saw her. Another morning, when I stepped into the Northbridge office, a small envelope sat on my desk. I did not recognize the handwriting until I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Lily, thank you for not giving up on us, even when you had every reason to. You taught me that a foundation is never redundant. Tyler." I smiled as I folded the note. Tyler had grown far beyond the eager young employee who once followed the wrong person. I knew he would become a key part of Northbridge's future. That day, I returned to my desk. On my screen was the Northbridge operations dashboard. Stable, smooth, without a single red warning. Nothing depended on one person. No one had to carry the entire system. Everything was distributed correctly, backed up carefully, documented clearly, and shared evenly. I glanced at the corner of the screen where a small yellow sticky note sat, the one I had posted in my first week, with a line I wrote to myself. They called me redundant, but they collapsed the moment I walked away. I touched the edge of the note lightly, then sat down to continue my work. Behind me was a team built on respect. In front of me was a system built the right way. And above all, I knew clearly that the value of a person can never be determined by those who lack the ability to see it.